Welcome to Tales from the Trenches Tuesdays. Today it is my absolute honor to have Malcolm Burrows with us.
Here's a story of a fundraiser who was launching his very own web show. Each episode is very short due to edits, so it can really flow. Here's a story of a podcast guest star who was busy raising money of their own. They were each great in their own way, fundraising in zone. Till the one day when Jack asked a guest to join him, and they knew it was much more than a jest, that these guests must somehow form a resource. That's the way they all became the podcast guests. The podcast guests, the podcast guests. That's the way they became the podcast guests.
Malcolm is a philanthropic advisor and gift planner with over 34 years of experience. He's the head of Philanthropic Advisory Services at Scotia Wealth Management. He founded and leads Aqueduct Foundation, a public foundation with donor-advised funds. Aqueduct is the 13th largest foundation in Canada by assets and has granted over $766 million to registered charities since its inception almost 20 years ago. He also leads Scotia Wealth Management's 100-year-old private foundation services practices. Before joining Scotia, he worked for three major Toronto charities from 1990 to 2004 and started his career in the arts. Malcolm is an active educator, writer, and volunteer in the charitable sector and wealth planning community. Through the Canadian Association of Gift Planners, he has contributed to the development of new charitable tax incentives, including the elimination of capital gains on gifts of public securities and the estate donation rules. His proposal for gifts of private securities and taxable real estate, published by C.D. Howe Institute, was included in the 2015 federal budget. He was CAGP's course director from 1999 to 2011 and is a member of the Government Relations Committee. So, welcome, Malcolm.
Thanks, Jack. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, far too often, if you go to a legacy page or plan giving or whatever you want to call it for any charity, they all focus on the how, right? How, right. Here's some sample wording for your bequest. Here's how to do a charitable remainder trust. Here's how to, as opposed to the why. And if you haven't got past the why, the how is kind of irrelevant. And I find that...
Yeah, I was going to cut you off because I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that's spot on. And it's one of the things that as our charitable sector evolves is the greatest, I think the greatest competitive advantage that charities have is their cause. And doing it well. And it's that connection that I see with clients and their enthusiasm. It's less the formal stuff. It's certainly, it's nice to have some technical understanding, but most clients aren't going to charities looking for financial planning advice. They're not looking for the technical side that's just going to make all the difference. And there's often a perception on the part of charities that if they only had the technical details right, and if they only made the gift, more tax effective, everything would align. And I think that's missing it. I think it's missing it entirely. And I find as well, again, with a lot of the philanthropists that I work with, that they lead into organizations, get excited, be involved when there's that values alignment, where there's that, they constantly come back and talk about passion, they talk about effectiveness, they talk about the way that the charity talks, that explains it and really brings it to life, the work that they do. They don't talk about the mechanics of it at all.
Right. Well, if I were to ask you for $1,000, you would be able to answer me that in 12 seconds. If I were to ask you for 1% of your estate, by definition, you're going to have to involve at least your lawyer. You may have to involve your financial planner. Sure. So, there's the professionals and everyone kind of needs to be in their own lane. Just realize that those, from the fundraising world, realize that those vehicles are out there, but charities aren't looking to you to be the subject matter expert. they're looking for you to have that sort of idea.
That's exactly right. And fundamentally, it's also, with all humility to the world of fundraising, there's a perception that, without our asking, the gifts wouldn't get made. And that's couldn't be further from the truth. It's really this complex dynamic that is born of, I think, that personal experience, the knowledge, the faith in the organization that they are going to, that they're well managed, that they're mission aligned, that they're effective, all of those sorts of things. Certainly drives estate donations, because so many bequests are not actually solicited. They're intrinsic donations. They come from inside and reflect experience. And that's why so often charities are surprised to find out about some very large donations that come to them. And they'll say, who is this person that just gave us our largest gift ever? And we don't know, how are they engaged?
Right.
So it's a much larger experience than just individual solicitations.
Yeah, and I find sometimes the charities themselves are ill-prepared for those windfalls. I always played the game when I was doing consulting. I said, Mr. Smith passes away tomorrow and leaves you $10 million of unrestricted revenue. What would you do with it? And most of them have, don't dream. It's just, well, we'll just turn up the volume. Whatever we're doing, we'll just do more of it. Instead of thinking of it as a transformational opportunity to really kind of leapfrog their charity ahead of all the other ones. And it just has to do with a vision exercise, right?
That's a wonderfully provocative and insightful question. And it's remarkably common for organizations that have always sort of lived on, income essentially each year. And then all of a sudden they get these capital gifts, and they're increasingly large. And the number of stories, first-hand experiences, second, thirds hand stories about charities that have received money and then turn in on themselves fighting over it. Because there's volunteers, there's a lack of policy, there's a lack of strategic direction. And so you have competing different visions. Years ago, my mother told me a story about, my parents were very involved with their church. And she was on sort of one of the board leadership councils and they'd received at the time a $2 million donation, a significant amount of money, even though they were a well-established organization, church. And she said it took 4 to 5 years of negotiating internally to just figure out. It literally sat on the side in GICs while they battled it out. And there was, and why? Because there wasn't that sense of direction. And that had a happy outcome in the sense that they ended up sort of putting together a plan and how it would be used. And there was some long-term, some short-term, there was some capital, but it reflects this larger challenge of gifts from the asset pocket, from the wealth pocket, can potentially be overwhelming for charities, which is one of the concerns. Actually, it's one of the reasons why we're seeing an increase in the use of foundations, because there's this smoothing device with these increasingly large donations coming through the charitable system.
Malcolm, this has been absolutely amazing. I love chatting with you. I've heard you speak dozens of times. I can recall once here in Ottawa, I remember giving you a lift out to the airport after you spoke somewhere. If folks wanted to get hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
Oh, just one of the best ways at this point is just through LinkedIn. I mean, send me a request. Anybody from the sector becomes a connection on LinkedIn. I really think it's important, and I have a lot of channels that open up, lots of chats, and as I said, I'm constantly learning from sector colleagues. It's so important to me. The worst thing that I could do is, I'm literally in a large tower right now that's having power problems because of the large summer rainstorm. but in a large tower in downtown Toronto. And it's so important to have that connection, to have the colleagues, to have these different experiences. And so I always, every week, I did spend time with colleagues from the sector. I'm learning, I'm finding out what they do. Sometimes we're able to help with funding and things like that. But if I don't have that ongoing engagement, if I don't have that ongoing learning, one of my great fears in life is to become a fogey. I don't want to be a fogey, and I would need that connection with my colleagues in the sector as a result.
Malcolm, this has been absolutely amazing, and I thank you so much for coming on.
Well, Jack, thanks for the invitation. It's just been great. I really appreciate it.
Hi, folks. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button right here.